Good morning. It's 13 minutes after 11 on April 19th, 2021. I'm mindful of this day. A few years ago, I requested a reprinting of my birth certificate after mine had been stolen. It was an official copy. And when I got the information regarding that document, the date of its printing was April 19th of 2018. I had received a great deal of information in connection with that birth certificate issue that I had not had access to. It was the long form, an official long form version of my birth certificate. One of the things that was confirmed is that more than 10 years earlier, before I had been in a position where I was able to obtain my birth certificate, I had spoken with my mother on the phone. She told me the time of my birth as she best remembered it, but I said that doesn't sound correct. I've seen my original birth certificate. I understand I was born at a different time. No, you were born at this time. So for 10 years I trusted my mother. Well, sometimes mothers make mistakes, which is why it's good that they have documents and that they have actual verification that can support them, just in case. They forget a time, they forget a date, even your birth, especially if your mother's in labor for 24 hours or more. It's very stressful. There's supposed to be support available to her. Received the long form copy of my birth certificate, and it affirmed what I had remembered from when I saw it. That I was born almost 12 hours different than what my mother had told me more than 10 years earlier. And that for 10 years I had been moving forward on an understanding of the time and positioning of my birth that was not accurate. But I also understood when I got that birth certificate that somebody had intentionally done that. And somebody had created other records with my identity. It had different characteristics, including of the things I'd done, as well as projections on what I was capable of. Were these made available to other people in my stead? Well, I have been separated from that specific birth certificate, and I have been tracking myself in what manner it was applied. I'll give you an example. April 19th historically can mean one thing depending upon where you're referenced. But it can also mean another thing, almost contrary, if that's the way you identify it. Let's say you have a birthday, and your birthday falls on a very important day for a group of people. But for another group of people, that specific day has the opposite implications. This is part of what happens in the history of warfare specifically. What if you were born on the anniversary of a great and victorious battle, and yet you've befriended or been encountered by those who were vanquished as part of that great and victorious battle? Oh, this is the irony. And it's even more protracted when somebody else steals your actual primary reference documents and then they decide, well, just because I like these metrics and or this nomenclatura, I'm going to use it to my advantage regardless of who it actually belongs to. This is also a part of the history of warfare. That's why today is very important. My last name is Krause, C-R-O-U-S-E. I've understood this to be my surname ever since I grew up. There's been various understandings I've had of this name, including that in some understandings it can be spelled different. It can be spelled with a K, it can be spelled with an A-U, it could be one S, it could be an S-E. The understanding is that it could potentially portend a family legacy from the areas that are now today called Germany, or even a family legacy from areas that are today called the United Kingdom. That information did not come to me until relatively recently. But my understanding is that it had a Germanic heritage, and that it could be either the name of a legacy of people that identified themselves as Christian, or a legacy of people that identified themselves as Jewish. It's ironic, one day I was somewhere and I met a woman who had the same last name but spelled differently. She told me about how she had traced her family all the way back to when they first arrived in the United States. Even the port that they came in, which just so happened to be very close to where my father lives today. So these things, over time, at some point, I was led to An understanding that the name I have under a particular spelling is connected to standards associated with coinage. Now, I'm going to be frank with you. I am somebody that for a very long time shied away as much as possible from the nuances of economics and the money system. It's just something I've been resistant to ever since I was young. It's one of the reasons why I've never been able to actually negotiate a salary. Whenever I go to a job, my interest is in performing the best job. Questions of compensation and salary are always the last thing. And I usually, at least until recently, have not really known how to ask for what I understand myself to be worth. Well, these things have a way of meeting out over time. I could say that it is very unsettling to me to think that part of my legacy and the implications of who I am, especially insofar as I understand how named references, regardless of the actual intent or content of that to which it is ascribed, often can have a currency or an import to other people that may not resonate with the actual individual so assigned. But at the same time, it could be an opportunity and a possibility to provide for people, including people I care about, something they need. And this is a very relevant time for such considerations. And that is why it is important to discuss standards. A big problem I have seen is somebody offers something or somebody does something. And then you show it to them. And they say, oh, that's not going to work. And you can't do that. We don't have the resources for that. Do something else. And then sometime down the road, somebody alleged to be more wealthy or more esteemed or have more clout ends up moving forward on that specific idea. And it's actually very valuable. And they've actually acquired a lot of resources to be put into it. Presumably, it's worth a lot of money. There may or may not be a direct correlation between what you intended to do with it and what they ended up trying to let people know they're doing with it. Well, what happens if you go a little further down the line? And then they change that specific entity or specific endeavor. And all of a sudden, you're revisited. Hey, remember when you did that? Remember when you thought about that? Yeah. What do you think about this? Then you invest. You speak about it. You think about it. Maybe even you come up with schematics. You might even do some research. Oh, you know what? I've moved on. What? Yeah, I mean, it wasn't going to work out anyway. But you asked me. And then how much longer do you have to wait? And in the meantime, how did they value you? What was your circulation? Where was your distribution? What was your taxation? Where are the records? Right? And that's where we are right now. And that's why there's something very important to talk to you about, and that is tomorrow. Nancy Reagan Day. There's a time, that's how I first encountered it. I was in college. April 20th was coming up. There was a festival at the university I went to. Somebody dressed up in a paper mache costume. It was what some might consider to be very tacky and distasteful. But the university I went to didn't have Greek societies. It focused on the classics, including the Greek classics. So there was a distinction. But when Nancy Reagan Day came up, well, what's Nancy Reagan Day? Who knows what Nancy Reagan Day is? Nancy Reagan Day, at least allegedly, was supposed to be in connection with Nancy Reagan's birthday, or rather the birthday of the DARE program, which was a program that was supposed to assist young people in avoiding and also confronting realities of peer pressure and other circumstances that would try to get them to do drugs. And specifically marijuana, but not exclusively marijuana. It could also include what, at least at the time, was identified as things like cocaine and or heroin. Now, when this program started, I was very young. So by the time I went to college, it had taken on a new umber. And the understanding was, well, we're going to go celebrate Nancy Reagan Day. What's that mean? Well, we're going to go smoke pot in public. And it was considered to be this ironic thing. You'll flip it. Oh, there's no big deal about smoking pot. And by the way, we're in college, and it just so happens to be the Harvard of the Midwest. It's one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And we're going to go smoke pot in public. Well, this was what 420 Day was as I first encountered it. Now, at the time, it had one implication. We're talking about the mid 90s. We're talking before 1996, right? That it started before certain things happened in 1996. Around this time, in 1996, right, would have been the first time I actually encountered and was invited to celebrate Nancy Reagan Day. I didn't think so much about it at the time. My relationship with recreational drug use was a different thing. It was not something I encountered growing up. Most of the people I knew had. Many of them had started smoking pot when they were in high school. This was not even something available to me in high school. I went to high school in a military base. It wasn't a reality. The worst thing we had to deal with was on graduation night, getting access to some wine. This was all I knew. We didn't have access to drugs. It wasn't a part of our reality. It was something somebody else did. And then you go to college. Other people have had this experience. In high school, they've got their own understanding of its merit, what it means, what all it entails. And there's something irony, flouting it in the face of whatever was the political ascribement of that which was promulgating an alternative political agenda. That's how it was understood on one level. But the actual imbibing, the actual ritual of defying the law in public space, including very exclusive public space, and getting away with it, was a rite of passage for many. When you are able to engage such a rite of passage, you have expectations, and they certainly had high expectations. Now we are where we are. In the last 4 years, I personally have witnessed a very comprehensive global campaign to attempt to normalize and legalize marijuana consumption. But you have to understand, this has come after a very strategic effort to suppress dissent in countries where drug policies, including drug policies attempting to acquire drugs from those countries for distribution to and through the United States, have been responsible for great harm and terror. This harm and terror is not just economic, it's not just even medical, it's also political, it's also environmental. It has attempted to annihilate entire bases of leadership that is very, very much needed right now. Twice, the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, I was on conference calls with people in countries in Central America, esteemed members of their community, almost the equivalent of what would be their ambassador, speaking to people in the United States about things that were going on connected to the targeted assassination of leaders in their community. Both times, somebody asked a question specific to what could be done to assist, how it was that the political priorities of people in the United States could be aligned in order to most beneficially support them and provide them with what they needed in order to deal with the material realities of where they were. And both times it was said unequivocally, you need to deal with your drug consumption. Even if it's legal in the United States, the parameters of the market economy, supply and demand, make it lethal, dangerous for us. Not just because it's illegal and somebody wants to try to coerce or pressure you into doing illegal things as a substitute for you doing what you have as an actual political identifiable goal. But also because when you create a system of haves and have-nots in other sectors of the market, then the capacity to obtain even an illicit product more cheaply somewhere else could potentially increase their risk. As a matter of fact, there's a additional added risk factor associated for countries outside of the United States when it is legalized within the United States specifically, because then it becomes merely about market demand. And so instead of the actual cultivation, consumption, and distribution of marijuana being politicized in one manner, it becomes politicized in another manner that disproportionately impacts certain political agendas as an alternative to others. In the course of that, leadership, actual real leadership that can communicate, that can set a priority, that can accommodate, acclimate, demonstrate some effective reconsideration of positioning in order to actually genuinely not only say you're in solidarity, but to demonstrate a political commitment, ends up becoming more and more difficult to find. And this is what has been happening. I consider one of the biggest global security threats we are dealing with right now to be the legalization of marijuana. It is being promulgated from a completely repressive, retrogressive political agenda that seeks to prioritize certain elements of the supply and demand economy without having an actual system of accountability and responsibility already established. This is not akin to what happened with tobacco. It's not like that. And in some ways, as much as it is akin to what's happening in regards to pharmaceuticals, which some would potentially try to identify along the lines of the opiates at a most extreme situation, it's not even like that. Part of what is going on with the legalization of marijuana is also the promulgation of a concurrent process of religious persecution or defamation of certain spiritual traditions, as well as an unrolling and attempt for normalization of the paradigm around hybridization that has a lot to do with what is a very, very real political agenda that is not being addressed as it needs to be, which is bioengineering. This is the greatest global security threat we're dealing with right now. And it is for that reason that I make a personal and urgent appeal today. Cease and desist, whatever it is that is occluding you from understanding the political realities of advocating for legalized marijuana. It is not being used for medicinal purposes. It is being used for purposes of social engineering in order to normalize people to other kinds of engineering. Engineering without standards. Engineering without accountability. And engineering in a manner that is completely counterproductive to whatever the alleged espousal of it is, as some sort of means by which to disengage other systems of oppression or to assist with liberation in another manner. Allowing for our brains to be able to function in a way that opens up portals and connects us with the cosmos and with nature and with each other, including our tribal or ancestral past. It's absolutely essential for our souls. It is. But we also live in an age where there is too little information and political action around the detriments of our addiction to electronics. You see, the normalization of marijuana and the legalization of marijuana, including in manners that allege to provide a tax basis, but without comparably engaging and committing to an environmental agenda around waste management, is in many ways a diversion for an intentional effort to manipulate our neuro processes and our body chemistry to make us addicted to somebody else's market demands. And this is why they won't give us an accurate valuation of our contributions overall. This is why they won't acknowledge what we've actually produced and how much it's worth. And this is one of the reasons why they want to titillate us with the possibilities of unbridled hybridization with that which you desire. No boundaries without ever authenticating you as a source of anything. It allows it to be accumulated by a very select, exclusive group of people who themselves, well, what is their investment in legalization of marijuana as a primary political agenda? Do the work yourself. Or understand that at some point we're going to have to deal with the realities of the war on drugs. And that's where we are right now. We are at war. It is a war. It is a war in our consciousness. It is a war in our people. It is a war on our political rights. And we need to engage it in a manner that does not just surrender. And that's what is happening right now. The last 3 years of the hijacking of the political system by opportunists attempting to exploit this social engineering regime to inure us or entice us with legal pot. It's not acceptable. They are an enemy. It doesn't matter if they're left. It doesn't matter if they're right. Their aim is to try to distract us while they steal our political rights. And at some point, an inevitable backlash is coming. I have said for a while that they're trying to set a trap. They act arrogant, like we're too stupid to figure out that the reason they're taunting and chastising us is because of this sense of power without accountability, where they're going to lure us into demonstrating the lesser elements of our personalities so that then they can try to typecast us and claim us as their property. And that's what they're doing. At some point, they're going to need to pay for certain things that they themselves did not create but want to claim as their own. They've already put a price point on it. They want other people to acknowledge they're worth more than they are, so they're going to have to devalue us more than they have already. And one of the means by which they're going to seek to do this is they're going to start targeting criminals, drug lords, and their adherents, devotees. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. At this point in my life, especially with the commitments I had to other people that I have not been allowed to share, to enjoy in the last few years because somebody else had a political agenda about attempting to compel me to co-conspire with them around the legalization of marijuana. I can't necessarily say on many levels I disagree with the identification of drug lords and their devotees as an appropriate target. But it's also about the means. This is my last warning. Under no circumstances whatsoever do I or would I support the legalization of marijuana and the normalization of the culture of marijuana consumption, as well as cultivation and distribution, especially in the stead of actual political rights and community with actual political leadership. This is a fight for our lives. That's what this is. I hope that you understand and that you recognize that this is coming from a position of love and service, because it's that real. It's the day before 420, 25 years after I was first invited to Nancy Reagan Day. I've gotten to know a little bit more about Nancy Reagan and her history and legacy in the last 25 years. I've changed my position. You can too. My understanding is, from personal experience and from my relationships with people that claimed to be involved in either harm reduction or some other form of drug interdiction, that a physical chemical dependency can take 2 days to cultivate. It often takes about 2 weeks to start disengaging as a habit in terms of actual time frames. But that the crucial moment regarding the craving usually passes very quickly. And that after the 3rd day, one can significantly diminish their desire for indulging that craving.